So, hello and welcome to this week's happiness show or question and answer, where I'm really excited about you asking me any questions you might have. I want to give a few words of introduction, actually, quite a few words of introduction explaining what this show is about, how I aim to help, what kind of questions you can ask. So in the title somewhere, I think below, I think that's where the title usually goes on YouTube, it mentions Islam. So first of all, you don't have to be a Muslim to benefit or listen to this show, this question answer. You can ask questions if you want. In fact, this question answer session or happiness class, whatever you want to call it, is actually targeted towards people who are not Muslim. That's the idea, actually, most of it, because so many people don't have an idea of the huge benefits Islam has and has had in the past. All you hear is what you see in the media, which is about 0% true. So please do ask your questions. Don't feel like you might offend me. I think, especially in today, the problems that people are facing at the moment is partly because people are not talking, people are not communicating, they're staying, they're either on the right side of the spectrum or the left side, and all that, people are not talking but arguing. And I'm really interested in listening to what you've got to say and having a conversation with you. It's a very chilled out conversation where I'm really interested in what you've got to say. If I was to summarize in a few words my motivations and my attitude towards you and the rest of the world, if it clarifies some of the misunderstandings that you might have heard about Islam, is the motto that I've been brought up with is love for all and hatred for none. So hopefully that little sentence explains a lot. I want to talk about also the nature of what I'm talking about. I'm going to explain. In a lot of things related to faith, people think that you've just got to believe. I'm going to do something really different to that. I'm going to show you that these age-old teachings from Islam, which actually include teachings from all sorts of religions, because Islam is the only religion that says all the other religions are also true, which is really interesting. Something you can talk to me about, by the way, if you want. There is a fixed topic, I suppose, well, there is a main topic, I should say, but really, you can ask me anything about life, anything from personal to global issues. I cover all sorts of things. But the reason why I pick a topic is because then I can go into depth about those topics. I'm always experimenting. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe I shouldn't pick one big topic. Who knows? But I found in the past when I picked like 5 or 6 topics, I was rushed for time and I could never really explain. I felt like there was so much more to explain when I did that. So I tend to go for about 45 minutes on one big issue and go into in depth. I do talk about a few other things as well, like my weekly happiness tip I like to begin with. What else is there to say? So why did I pick this topic, which is how can we save the environment the old way? So last week I talked about how can we change the world, and it's very general. How can we change the world, generally speaking? And I only really got to an introduction, or the first phase, or the first part of explanation, which was the revolutionary movement that I'm part of that is destined to change the world. Maybe that sounds really strange. You should probably check out that video to explain it. And it pins on the idea, or the reality, in fact, that God exists and has never left us alone and is always with humankind and has always working through prophets and people that he picks to guide the rest of humanity, to work with the rest of humanity. So that was just the first part. But then I said that was like the description of who would do it. Is all of us that are going to do it, make change in the world. But there'll be those who lead the way. The people who really want to change the world are effective, have inevitably the people who are going to really change the world, the people who are going to let go of their egos and follow what they realize is the truth by logic and things like that. So what I was explaining very brief, trying to explain, is that I'm going to be talking not just about faith, but I'm going to talk about logic, I'm going to talk about science, I'm going to be talking about psychological studies that support the things I am seeing. And so in this let's say, how do I describe it? This show is kind of a lead on or a follow on from the last show, where I'm going to actually talk about some specifics, the environment, of how we're going to change the environment, how Islamic ideas have always helped the environment. So let's talk about that very quickly. So, but what I always like to do is I always like to start with a weekly happiness tip before I really get into the main topic. And so, and this is the kind of stuff that I live by and totally changes lives so easily. That's one of the things I want to get across, that Islam makes your life easy without much effort. I was going to say makes your life easy easily, but that wouldn't, I don't know if that would make much sense. So here goes. There's a whoops, I put the wrong thing on the board. So I tried to put a whole bunch of a whole bunch of little displays, so I don't have to type them up and waste time doing that. So take up this is the weekly happiness tip that I want to give, that hopefully you can understand in a few minutes. Take up good deeds only as much as you're able, for the best deeds are those done regularly, even if they are few. So that might not seem life-changing or even world-changing, but in the next few minutes, I'm going to try to explain how that is, and how the greatest and the greatest experts and the most successful people implement exactly this. So I'm going to try to summarize this little saying in a few words, which is: be consistent and work on small things at a time, rather than get too excited and try to do lots of things, because that's our natural uh, attitude, that we want things now rather than sometime in the future. We don't want to work slowly towards things. We want to sprint towards them rather than realize that life is a marathon, not a sprint, as you might have heard. And people who are really experienced in life and doing great things absolutely realize that. So let me give you a few examples of how that is true. So if we look at the example of British cyclists, right, for many years, in fact, about 100 years, they were basically unknown in terms of cycling ability. They had won one gold medal about 100 years ago or something, in 1908 or something ridiculous. And so they were in a pretty bad state. And so they brought on some guy, I can't remember what his name was, and he had this principle of essentially do make things 1% better and keep doing them every day. So there was a fancy word for it. I think it was, let me see if I can find it, aggregation of marginal gains. Okay, so aggregation means it builds up slowly, marginal, very small, and of course gains, improvement. And this is very much the spirit of this saying that you can see on your screen at the moment: do small things and consistently. So what happened when this was done? So this guy, who was the new coach of the British cyclist team, said, in 2 years, I think you will start winning gold medals. And they hadn't won a gold medal for 100 years. So that's pretty, a bold statement. No, actually, I think they said 5 years. I can't remember, right? I'm not a specialist. I have very little interest in British cycling, but I have an interest in self-improvement and happiness and things like that. So I know a little bit about this. So the point is that within 2 years, what happened is they didn't just win one gold medal. Oh, let me get this right. Within 2 years, they started winning the Tour de France. Okay, Tour de France, if you don't know anything about cycling, is like the main cycling event of the world or something, okay? And they won it, and then they won it again, and then they won it 4 out of 5 times. So they've never ever won the Tour de France. I didn't explain that. They've never won it before, and now they just keep winning it, okay? And then on top of that, when it came to the Olympics, they won 70% of the gold medals. So just implementing this seemingly boring advice is totally life-changing. And I could go on about it, but I think I'll leave it at that, because what I'm trying to do today is do things in 5-minute chunks. Maybe it's a bad idea, who knows? Let's go on to the next thing. So now I want to get into the main topic, which is how to save the environment the old way. What I mean by the old way is that we have always had the secrets of how to handle the environment. We're actually very good at it in our natural state. And definitely Islam has told us so many secrets of how to live with the environment. So it's nothing new. We've just been globalized, and so therefore our effects on the environment just become bigger and bigger, but the principles essentially stay the same. So you've got on the screen one of the many sayings that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or many things he said to support the environment and make sure we can work with the environment. So he said, if the hour, the day of resurrection, or basically your last minute, is about to be established, and one of you is holding a palm shoot. So I think the translation is not the best. It's like if you're literally on your last hour and you are holding, a seed, basically, plant it. Okay, let him take advantage of even 1 second before the hour is established and plant it. So even if you're literally in your last second of your life, plant that tree. I mean, have you heard of a more greener religion than that? In fact, the color of Islam is supposed to be green. So the flag of Islam is supposed to be green. So by no mistake, by the way, because it's supposed to represent nature, and Islam is supposed to be totally in line with nature. And I'm going to just read out a few other lovely sayings by Prophet Muhammad. Let me read a few out. So this is from the Quran, actually, the next one. The Quran, by the way, is the guide for life or for all of humanity. You don't have to be a Muslim to be able to read it or benefit from it. It's from God, who works with our psychology, so he knows what we can do, and he's a creator of nature, so he knows what needs to be done and how. So anyway, this is something this is something the Quran says: there is not an animal that lives on the earth, nor a being that flies on its wings, but they form communities like you. So the way the Quran communicates is to our soul, as it were. So it doesn't just tell you facts, it talks to you in a way that you kind of go, oh, okay, I get that. So like, these creatures, they're not just things to be taken advantage of. They have their little communities, their families. They're living things that need to be respected. They're part of a bigger ecosystem that we live in. So that's kind of the idea that's supposed to come across. Nothing we have omitted from the book, which is the Quran, and they shall be gathered to their Lord in the end. So you will be made to stand in front of God if you do not treat animals well. Okay, let me quickly read a few more. Whoever kills a sparrow or anything bigger than that without a just cause, Allah would hold him accountable on the day of judgment, just like I just said. There's another saying, whoever is kind to the creatures of God is kind to himself. So that's very interesting. It's based on a lot of psychology. For example, psychopaths are known to treat animals badly. So very much related to that. I can go into that anytime you feel like. And Who has hurt the feet? Okay, this is part of I'm reading part of a longer conversation that Prophet Muhammad had with his one of his followers, or a group of his followers who were actually hungry, and they took some eggs from a bird's nest, and Prophet Muhammad arrived to the place, and he could see the sparrows circling round and round and seemed to be upset. And he said, "Who has hurt the feelings of this bird by taking its young?" So he guessed what happened, and then basically got those people to return the eggs even though they were hungry. So let me just check every now and then. I'm just gonna. There's so many things I could add to that. Just really very much an introduction to what I want to talk about. The next thing I want to talk about is about a German woman who married into a Maasai family. What happened there? It's just a YouTube video I saw recently. Some beautiful things she said that got my attention. I'm just going to quickly look if any questions have arrived. Comments? Nope. Okay. Every now and then I'll check. Okay. So why a German woman married into a Maasai family, essentially because she loves to respect nature. So she was a biologist, she was living in, I can't remember where now, and somewhere in Africa, terrible geography there, but and she was always interested in living in harmony with nature, and ended up, long story short, marrying a Maasai. Maasai means basically a sort of tribal African group, okay? And they live very close to nature. And the first thing I want to get across is that there's a viral video about her, which is, clearly very popular. Lots of people are interested. And one of the things she was asked was like, do you feel sorry for yourself that you had had to given up so much to live from a modern country like Germany, which is far more modern than even the UK, to go down to this very basic level of existence? Well, I don't even like to describe it as a basic level of existence, which I'll give you a reason why shortly. And she said, I feel sorry for Westerners. I feel sorry for those people who are so disconnected from nature. And when you're disconnected from nature, you're also disconnected from each other. You're just not happy. People who are connected with animals, as I kind of mentioned before, are more kind to each other as well. And when we're horrible to animals, like we are in the industrialized West, treating animals like objects and like battery in, as in where you have battery farm chickens and everything, where we drugging animals so they can keep staying alive in really artificial environments without light or anything like that. When we're that horrible to animals, it's not a surprise that we're not very nice to each other, and it's not a very big surprise that we're, even in a super populated city like London, that we're all alienated from each other. We're all lonely despite being surrounded by people, because we don't know how to treat each other. We're not in touch with nature or anything like that. So what I want to get across is that we can, if you watch this video, you can certainly, first of all, we can certainly live with nature and be in harmony with nature. And the second thing is I want to really get across is that it's a lot of fun, and you'll be much happier when you are in line with nature. As maybe you should check up the video and you'll see what I mean. I myself lived in a village for a while in the Middle East, in the middle of nowhere, where houses were about 200 or I don't know how many 100 meters away from each other. And we had loads of animals, and it really changed it really changed me completely. The way I lived with animals, the way I even ate myself. We grew a lot of our own food. I got a lot skinnier, but it wasn't a big deal, we just didn't have such high expectations of what we consumed. One of the funny things is that, like, when I was there for so many years, let's say 3 years, we didn't even eat cereal. And cereal is just usually processed food, hopefully I try to eat muesli and stuff, but over here, but yeah, it's just there are habits that are completely unnecessary in the Western world, and we can change those quite easily, and therefore live in harmony with the world without consuming all sorts of plastics. And when I say consuming plastics, not literally eating plastics, but using plastics unnecessarily and so many things like that. Something I think I'll talk about nearer the end. I think we've had a very interesting change in our lives through the pandemic, which has reduced our plastic use, I think. Anyway, talk about that soon. I think maybe 5 minutes per topic is a bit extreme, but let's just go with it because I've got so many topics I want to cover. Okay. So there are so many levels at which Islam completely changes things for our benefit so that we make things easier. So if the system that you live in actually encourages you to overconsume, that makes it really hard to buck the trend, to go against the grain, as it were. But if you have a system that makes it really easy, then it's easy. So let me tell you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the current economic system we live in the West. And that economic system is essentially based on interest. It's one of the linchpins of what drives the economy. So what am I talking about? So what is interest? It's when you borrow money and then you have to pay back more money than you borrowed. And that seems like a fair deal, I suppose, to some people if you're not really looking at it into too much detail. But what that does, why that makes us overconsume, is that if, say, you're a business and you borrow some money, by the time you've made enough profit to pay some of that back, because the way interest works, you have to pay back even more money. So you're always chasing, and then you might end up taking another loan to catch up, you see. And at a bigger scale, at a macro level, when you look at maybe the whole country is borrowing money on interest and constantly playing catch up. So this is kind of a fundamental way that Western countries work, is that they need to grow faster every year simply to survive. I mean, you would think growing faster would make you more and more wealthy, but that's just to survive. If you do not grow fast enough, you cannot pay back the interest. It's nuts. Okay, and I feel like I feel like reading a verse of the Quran that gets across this message. If I haven't got rid of it or something. Oh yes. So those who devour interest do not rise except as rises one whom Satan has smitten with insanity. That is because they say trade is also like interest, and there's more to it. And these verses of the Quran, if you read them in a rush, they're not gonna. I don't think people. I definitely can't understand them straight away without really contemplating on them. So I'll explain it or do the short version or whatever. So the idea is that interest drives you crazy, and it's a satanic invention. And it's an invention that was forbidden, not even just for Muslims, but even amongst the Jews. The Jews are not allowed to use interest, but apparently, according to them, they're allowed to use interest against. I think that would be actually a good word, against other people. So it's not a new idea, and it's forbidden because it's tempting. It's a tempting way of making money. It's tempting because it's bad. It's tempting because, as I'll try to explain, it makes the rich richer. So it basically plays into your greed and makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. Should I explain that now? what I want to explain first is how does the interest system basically make you overconsume? So if you are forced into a situation where you have to produce more and more, you're essentially going to have to consume more and more, and you know, get more and more of the earth's resources and produce more and more, even though you don't need to. So that's what that's doing. And it actually, let me talk about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. What interest does is, well, it's not the rich that take out loans on interest. Okay, they're the ones who get paid for keeping their money in their accounts, sitting in their accounts, and they get loads, millions and millions of pounds, while the poor are the ones who have to pay more and more interest because they borrow on interest. They do the opposite. So it's a way of robbing the poor and giving to the rich. And therefore, yeah, the poor feel the need to keep working harder and harder. And it also encourages materialistic behavior. So encourages you poor people to borrow money to get stuff that they're greedy for, or they see their friends with. And so they borrow money to buy things they don't have the money for at the moment, and then they're just continuously chasing and spending on credit cards, and that's a very big problem in the West at the moment. Okay, I'm trying maybe too hard, but let's keep going. Right, okay, so 5 minutes. I'll be honest, right? I'm trying to see, I do a timeline thing afterwards, and it takes forever, where I do chapters, I think YouTube chapters, say this 5 minutes or this 10 minutes I'm doing this topic, and it takes forever listening to my own video. So if I keep to 5 minutes each time, which I'm a bit behind now, then it just makes it easier to do the chapters. Terrible, isn't it? Maybe I'll do 10 minutes ago next time. Each time I'm doing this, I'm learning. Anyway, so yeah, so on the board, on the screen, you can see women going to work started agricultural crisis and global warming. That sounds really weird. How can women start global warming? Okay, and what I'm going to demonstrate in this, and maybe I think the next thing, is that when we deviate from God's plans or God's instructions, all sorts of unintended consequences follow. It's like a domino effect. So something as subtle as women going to work has the huge effect of global warming. How can a woman melt an iceberg? Wow, I'm going to show you how. I'm going to show you the magic trick. So this is how it goes. So especially after World War II, where there's a lot of propaganda for women to go to work, and I suppose it was necessary because they had to go to work to fill in the roles that men couldn't do because they were out fighting the wars, the actual war. They were there, making weapons and things, yeah, or just keeping the essentials of the economy working, yeah. So they were encouraged to do jobs, but they didn't all go back after World War II. There were a lot of problems basically after World War II, which I might talk about. For example, so many men had died that there weren't enough men to be married to, and that caused all sorts of social issues you can imagine. I'm going to try to avoid going to that, but basically they didn't go back to work, and so what happened as a consequence was that women stopped trying to cook food because they didn't really have enough time, and they started devaluing learning how to cook food, and or even taking care of the family and all this kind of stuff. So even if they had time for food, because slowly, generation by generation, they lost the ability to cook food or cook properly, then what they started doing is buying frozen food. And frozen food, all these different manufactured goods with lots of chemicals and things like that, they are not just got from local places. They are got from all sorts of weird ingredients from all over the country. Just to give you an idea, in America, there's a great video about this you should check. What was the video's name? What's Wrong with What We Eat? Okay. And this person, who's a great expert in food, did not intend to make the point that I'm making, but he kept repeating this idea that effectively women not cooking resulted in poorer quality food, but also food being created no longer by simple vegetables and things like that, but by chemicals and vitamins and all sorts of artificial things, which had to be made in an industrial way. So that basically harmed the environment in multiple ways, including having it transported across the country and across the world to create food. So when food is industrialized like this, which is the unintended consequences of not cooking food at home, or not cooking or even growing food locally, because everybody 100 years ago grew their own food. Okay, they had their own animals, and it wasn't so hard. New York apparently had its own pigsty, according to this guy, this great video that I just mentioned. So what I'm saying is that from not valuing cooking your own food or taking care of the family or even growing your own food, having that somebody to take responsibility for that, which was the housewife, then what happens is food becomes a product which is created industrially, and industrial processes are really bad. These kind of industrial processes are really bad for the environment. There's so many examples, can't even count, like how bees are suffering and they're dying out because we grow too many of one kind of plant. We do miles and miles and miles of plants, and so bees are just all they're seeing is one kind of food, and they're getting really sick. Because they might see sunflowers for miles and miles and miles. Imagine you could only eat one kind of food. Bees don't like to eat one kind of food either. So I'm kind of showing you like all the problems that come with industrialization or the mechanization of food, and it came as a consequence, unintended consequences of women not cooking at home. And so what I'm trying to get across is, the basic thing I missed in this kind of introduction is that Islam is very strong on having gender roles, which are not popular today. I say they're not popular. I think there's kind of an outspoken group who make all the noise and who you see on YouTube, but there's so many people at grassroots who are just tired of this idea that men and women are the same. And it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem in every aspect of our lives. So it's common for me to, as a teacher, for example, when I'm in a staff room or wherever, and women teachers are saying, we would happily give up our jobs and work, just be at home, because we love to be at home and take care of children and have children, and not have to compete with men, because men are just like physically stronger. What kind of competition is that? And that just reminds me another thing about, you got this issue of like transgender, I think they call it, athletes. And because there's so much confusion about who's a man and what is a woman and all this kind of stuff, we have people who grew up being men and then they started taking all sorts of drugs that would reduce their testosterone levels, their male hormone levels, and now they can race in in the Olympics as a woman, and they've already got the build, the bigger heart and the bigger build and the bigger muscles and everything, so they just win all the races without much effort, really. And not only that, it's even in terms of relationships, because men and women are confused about their roles. It causes so much confusion in terms of who should go for work, what should one person do or the other. There's so much tension in relationships, and men are feeling, because they're not encouraged to be manly, they're not able to be themselves, And women miss that as well because they expect men to be men, because women want to be women. They want to play their role and men to take the lead. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for it's not politically correct anymore. So there are so many issues, even though it's kind of not environmental that I'm talking about. I'm just trying to give you like the broader picture that when we go out of line with nature, we have hundreds of problems. One of them is the environment. You know, we need women to cook is the short version. Okay. And it's not a bad thing taking care of your family and cooking healthy food for your family. I don't think so anyway. Here's another small funny thing. Eating with your hands controls overeating. Okay, so there's a saying of Prophet Muhammad: the best vessel to eat with is your hands. Okay, there's so much amazing evidence. Will you believe that eating with your hands reduces your chances of diabetes? Like, how does that happen? Do you know what I mean? It's amazing. How does that happen? So the idea is, and it's kind of this is scientific, by the way, so you can check this up. It's like when I start talking about it, you'd be like, wow, how's that possible? So when you're eating with your hands, there are so many things that happen at a subconscious level. So when your hand touches the food, it's something we don't fully understand. It's something to do with the texture of the food. When you touch the food, your digestive system, what did I just say? Digestive system starts getting ready in some different way so that you process the food when it goes into you better. Here's another thing that might surprise you. You might think eating with your hands is dirty, right? But they, as in scientists and researchers, whatever, they found that people who eat with their hands are cleaner when they eat their food. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, because like you're more likely to wash your hands if you're going to use your hands to eat. So that's just another thing. Another amazing thing is that they've found that people eat less food when they're eating with their hands. And if you think about it, I suppose you're kind of more connected with your food. Now, let me explain it a bit better. Connected with your food. What does that mean? Like, what it means is that you appreciate what you're eating. You are feeling your food. Let me give you a picture of something you might be doing yourself, okay? Which is the alternative. When you're eating with a spoon, what you're doing is you are shoveling in the food faster. You're watching TV. You're not even consciously eating, right? So you might know that you can choke yourself just by not being fully aware of what you're doing when you're eating, right? Okay, but at a more subtle level, you're just consuming faster and faster. You're not even aware because you're watching TV, because you don't have enough respect for your food. And this is another thing Islam teaches. Islam teaches even have respect for bread. Yeah. So when you have respect for bread, you're going to have respect for the rest of your food. And how do you respect your food? You don't watch TV when you're eating. We try to avoid it. Yeah. So all these things, all these really subtle things completely change how we live on this earth. So let's get back to the environment. How does this save the environment? Well, if you're eating with your hands and then you're not eating as much, then wow, okay, so you're solving a massive problem of overconsumption, destroying the planet to get the food. So just to put this into context, 1/3 of the world is used to grow meat, I think it was. Yeah, ridiculous. So we're cutting down huge rainforests, we're taking tons of water resources, huge amount, like not a small amount. I can't remember the exact details. Have I got anything somewhere on my little notes? Let's see. 30% of the Earth's surface used as raising animals for food. Yeah, I haven't got too many notes on it, but basically we're eating way more food or meat especially than we need to, and meat takes the most resources to create. Takes a lot more watering of the animals and feeding. We're not even treating the animals well. They have to be drugged constantly to stay alive, but certainly not well. Yeah, they're constantly on antibiotics, and more antibiotics I think are fed to cows and animals than to human beings, as far as I understand. So it's ridiculous how cruel we are to animals in the current way, and it's completely unnecessary. And one way of solving this problem is by eating less meat, and an easy way of doing that is naturally by using your hands to eat. So here's a tip for, as I say, Islam has got amazingly easy ways to make the world a better place. Just use your hands, for example, when eating. Let's go to another thing. So a very interesting fact I read once in a newspaper: 1.5 billion people die of obesity, while at the same time 1 billion people die from starvation a year. That is, wow. Okay, so my takeaway from that, I mean, besides it being a ridiculous situation, is that clearly there's enough food in the world. In fact, we're eating more than we need, so we're making ourselves so sick. And if maybe if we gave some of that food to the people who are not, people without food, we would balance things out. Okay, some people might say, "Oh, you just got an extra 500 million people dying of obesity. How about zero people die of obesity, right? Then all that extra food can go to the people who, um, are dying of starvation." So it's pretty easy. Where you don't need to get to the level that you're obese. You should be eating a tiny fraction of that. We as human beings need very little to stay alive. The reason why we eat so much is because we're so unhappy. We mainly eat to fill in time and to cover our sadness inside, because we're lonely, we're disconnected, we're bored, and all this kind of stuff. And if we just lived with the animals that we're trying to kill, we would have a huge amount of fun living with animals. We used to have chicks when I was in the Middle East, chicks and all sorts of animals. Just taking care of them is a huge amount of fun. Yeah. So where are we now? So, another thing I wanted to point out was, again, an economic system that makes it really easy for us to live in the world. And that is, so on one side, I mentioned interest, which is really bad. I talked about what that does. There's another thing called zakat, which is tax you have to pay, or really is considered a charity that you give to the government so it can be spent on poor people and just about everybody. And that's what is spent, or sorry, what you have to give is unused wealth. So it's a very unusual tax. So when governments tax nowadays, they usually tax on your living wealth, but this tax is, if you want to call it a tax, is a tax on your unused wealth, which is really smart. And what that does is, for those people who've got surplus wealth, is very important to keep circulating it, because I'm trying not to get into the economics, but I'll quickly explain it. That it's very important. Money is like blood within a body. So if it's not going round and round, it's really damaging to the body. Okay, if it gets stuck in one place, which interest encourages. So the whole point of that, what has that got to do with the environment? I'm just thinking, I need to slow down a little bit. Okay, so what has that got to do with the environment? I'm just laughing at myself because I've been rushing and explaining too many things. is that first of all, it encourages giving to the poor, and it spreads the wealth, so that we're not working like crazy endlessly as interest requires. And as I might have mentioned before, I'm not sure in this show or somewhere else, that uh, combining interest with this idea of zakat actually makes economies grow really fast, because it does things like increase money velocity, which you can read about. Because basically, if you have people who have a lot of money who are not using it, they get taxed. This thing called zakat. So what happens is, what the result of this incentive, as it were, is that they start investing it in all sorts of businesses wherever they can find, usually small businesses. Okay, and so they essentially give it to poorer people so they can make use of it, and they can grow their businesses and things like that. So it spreads the wealth. It's a really good mechanism for spreading the wealth, and therefore not forcing the rich to get richer unnecessarily, where you're creating goods for no reason really, just making the rich richer, and giving them money that they don't really need, and the poor are still poor, and so they feel the need to keep creating. So it's a crazy cycle, completely unnecessary. And Islam has these amazing systems to make things easier. So if you're within a system that makes things easier, then you just go with the system and you benefit from it, is the idea. Anyway, what else is there on the list of things to talk about? Oh, so this is an interesting, so this is an interesting verse of the Quran. And it's interesting. Let me read it. And when thy Lord said to the angels, I'm about to place a vicegerent in the earth, they said, will you place therein such as will cause disorder in it and shed blood? So what is this about? What's the context? Basically, God was saying, look, I'm about to. There's a whole bunch of related stories to this particular situation, but he was going to say, look, I'm going to put not plonk man on earth, because we believe in evolution and things like that, but we'll basically give power or ability to these human beings who are evolving from a weaker stage to a higher stage, and give them power and vicegerent. The idea is that they were kind of, the word is Khalifa, and which has many meanings, and one of them is the caretaker of the planet. Okay, and also leader. Okay, so with this power comes great destruction as well. I'm kind of, so these verses, there's this verse and there's a couple of other verses with this little story. And when I say story, it doesn't literally mean that this actual conversation happened between the angels and God, because the angels just follow orders. But what it continues to say later on is that God demonstrated the qualities of human beings. So yes, in short, human beings can be hugely destructive, as we see. And what this verse is kind of demonstrating or trying to say is, God is totally aware how capable we are of being destructive, but also, as later verses point out, that when we fulfill our abilities, God-given abilities, then we become in line with nature. So it's not like we automatically fall in line with nature. As we follow godly laws, then we become at one with nature. And so it takes that effort to have that self-control, to do things that are better for us. But if we go by our feelings and greed and things like that, then we go into a downhill spiral of consuming more than we need, etc. So what are the kind of things that are against our immediate nature but good for ourselves in the long term? Things like being nice to our neighbors. Who does that in London nowadays? Who talks to their neighbors and says, hello, how can I help you, and things like that? There are lots of people who do, but like they're kind of relatively few. So on our street, I think I might have mentioned before, um, we are the ones, because of my Muslim background, and I say our, I mean my family. We go to different houses and give sweets when it's Christmas or New Year's or whatever you call it, and or in Eid when we're doing our own celebration, and they all love it. All our neighbors love it, and we're purposely social more than we would naturally be if we were left to our own devices. So what I'm trying to get at is that we will not automatically be in line with nature. It requires us following these rules that make us better people and take effort, and then eventually we will be in line with nature and have a great time being in line with nature, because life that way is much better than living in a concrete jungle, disconnected from animals, nature, and even other human beings, because that's the kind of natural consequence. Disconnect with nature and you disconnect with everything else, even yourself. You don't even know what you want anymore. You think you just want an iPhone, but really you just want to be connected with another person or things like that. What else is on my list of things to talk about? Okay, materialism, overconsumption. What's the antidote? Togetherness. Okay, so this is actually blending into what I was trying to talk about a minute ago. I think I'm going to put this down. I've got still 3 more topics, so let's go for it. Yeah, so materialism leads to overconsumption. What is materialism? It says basically you get happier when you buy stuff, which is not true. It makes you happier temporarily. That's why we fall for that trick, but we tend to fall for the same trick over and over again. So if I only had that, then I'll be happier. So you work really hard and you get that thing, and then you get happy for about 5 seconds, and then you're miserable again. And this is something the Quran points out, which is the people who are materialistic, essentially people who do not believe, is the way the Quran describes, because if you're a believer, you're not materialistic. Then if you're materialistic, what happens is you are someone who is likened to a person chasing a mirage, a thirsty person chasing a mirage in the desert. It's a really good description. You're constantly thirsty, you're never satisfied, and you're always chasing this mirage, which is essentially an illusion, which is unreal, but it looks like water. So you look like you're going to get that thing that will finally quench your thirst, but it doesn't. And then it says in the Quran that God is very quick in paying you what you deserve. So you get what you deserve, and what you deserve for being materialistic is sadness and heartburn. Heartburn, not as in heartburn in like in indigestion, but feeling inner pain because you're not fulfilling your true nature, which is to be spiritual and to try to connect with God and connect with other human beings. Instead, you're trying to get stuff, buy happiness. So let's move on to the next thing. So obviously, materialism is just going to encourage you to go crazy and buy more and more stuff, because it's an endless cycle. You think you're going to get happy, you get the thing that you thought was going to make you happy, it doesn't work, and you do it again and again and again, consuming completely unnecessarily and damaging the environment in the process. Let's go to the next thing. Do not, this is a fascinating one. Okay, let's see if I can do this in about 2 minutes. So all I'm really pointing out in this this. Oh my god, I haven't even checked the comments for ages. No comments. Okay, fine. Okay, so let me read. All I'm really demonstrating here again and again is that when you're in line with God's guidance, life is really easy. You don't damage the environment. Well, and every time you fall out of line with it, like, women going out to work and not taking care of the home and the children and the food and all this kind of stuff, or being greedy and being materialistic and not eating with your hands, all these things. Every time we're not in line with God's teachings, we end up destroying the environment. That's one of the many consequences. Okay, so this is a very interesting example. Do not use the skins of predators is a teaching and advice by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Okay, and it's very interesting for biologists who know about this thing, the Yellowstone Park case study, where basically they reintroduced wolves who had died out by over hunting of the wolves or something like that, right? Let me explain what's going on here in this let me introduce this as best as I can. So do not use the skins of predators. So the idea is that Islam basically discourages you from killing predators. Now, here's an interesting fact I didn't really know much before I did a bit of research and somebody mentioned it to me. Predators are far fewer in numbers than prey, the things that get eaten by predators. And so if you kill them unnecessarily, or you have to be really careful not to kill them, and therefore not use their skin, for example, for fur and things like that, then you can destroy the ecological balance ecosystem. And that's exactly what happened in Yellowstone for many years. Just to give you some idea, beavers had disappeared, lots of plants and insects had disappeared from Yellowstone. But when they introduced the wolves, they ate more of these things called elks, which I see as deers, basically. And then, because the deers were eating less of the plants and things like that, those things survived more, including certain kinds of trees. I think they're willow trees. And when willow trees started growing again, had a chance to grow again, the beavers were happy because that's their favorite tree to make their dams and things. So it's like one thing after the other. And biologists are completely amazed by what's happening in Yellowstone Park. So maybe you should check it out and see these really subtle things which seem to have no consequence. Do you not kill the skins of predators? A lot of people say, why? I want to kill the skins of predators. So do you not use the skins of predators? And some people say, what kind of, they might think it's silly advice, but it's amazing how powerful these very simple bits of advice are. And it doesn't harm us. Like, we could use the skins of sheep or whatever, when we don't lose anything. This is just brilliant advice to not make the mistake of killing a predator whose role in the environment is so pivotal. So what's the last thing? So I like to put a twist on things. I said the old way of, I said in the title, the old way of saving the environment, and now I'm talking about technology. Actually, it's always been the way of God to use technology to help the environment. Let me just, so some people who don't believe in God, which is actually very unreasonable, mathematically very unreasonable, because it's like basically impossible for even one blood cell to be made. It should have taken longer than the age of the universe to make one blood cell. So that's how ridiculous it is, right? So when you realize God exists, then you begin to also realize how amazing, how much work, I don't want to say work, but how much how many things are done to sustain our really pathetically delicate existence that we have? Like, we've literally got a force field around the earth. It's some sort of magnetic field which destroys all these meteorites and stuff. Like, crazy how many things there are to keep us alive. Okay, so when you realize that there's a God who's sustaining us, then we start seeing other patterns. So for example, because I've only got like a minute left, is when the combustion engine was like designed or invented, around the same time lots of crude oil was found. It's like, what a weird coincidence. So we get the resources we need when ideas are given to us by God. And this idea of ideas given to us by God might sound strange, but people who are real inventors, the artists, the real creators, are very aware of this strange process that comes from somewhere else, as it were. The Romans used to call it genius. So the word genius in itself, which has a whole very interesting history all the way back to related to Islam as well, jinn. That what a genius used to be was not a person, it was a spirit that gave you good ideas. So even now, people who are creators are very aware of that. I recommend, since I've only got like -1 minute left, I recommend you watch a great talk. Where have I got it? Your Elusive Genius, a TED Talk. Just check it out. Understand something. You'll learn a lot about the real creative process. And it's not really human beings just having great ideas. It's an it's a very external process and God-driven process, I would say. So all these things happen at the right time. And so, technology can totally change things. A last thought would be, look at how the pandemic has changed our transport needs. We don't completely waste our time going into offices when we don't need to. We just work from home. How much petrol and everything does that save? How much energy does that save? How much plastic does that save? Because now we're not buying things in shops completely unnecessarily. We just eat at home, saving on plastic and packaging and whatever. I'll leave it at that. I'm just going to have a quick last check on the comments. See if there's anything there. Nope. So thank you very much for listening. Peace be upon you. Please have a great week. Even think of a question if you want. Comment below during the week and I'll try to answer them even to you personally or in the next show. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. I didn't even talk about my hat. It's not my haircut, by the way. It's a hat. I was going to talk about that as a new kind of prop, but I totally forgot about it. Maybe next time.